Well, hello. Today I wanted to tell a story about a recent BLM Mustang filly that came in. She's been here just under 2 months now, and I just wanted to share her story because I think it's a big reflection of what is happening or what is not happening in our society with our horses and how we approach our horsemanship, even when we have good intention, and how important having a support system that is, I'm going to say, cohesive or consistent in how things are done with the horse matters, especially in this case with a wild horse and helping build her trust to replace her fear and fleeing, and her willingness to try, her reasonableness, even in unfamiliar or potentially concerning moments. So, for those of you who've been following, Calamity Jane arrived here, like I said, about 2 months ago. And when she arrived, she was loose in the trailer, backed her up to the round pen, just let her loose into it. And it took about 2 weeks before she even considered letting me touch her. And during that time, it was not about, giving her all the time in the world or just, hanging out type of thing. There was very much specific and intentional sessions with her, but it was still I'm going to say, non-agenda oriented experience. So, meaning I would have to go into the pen and see where her mind and emotions were that day, and wherever she was, then that would help delegate what it is that I did as far as how I was communicating through pressure and looking to get her mind engaged with me. She was very good at avoiding and thinking about everything except what it was that I was doing. Or, even when I would move, she would look away, she would avoid, she'd withdraw. So, trying to get that curiosity. And as that curiosity emerged, then we had what I call, the opening of conversations, to where she was starting to become available to learn to search and try for whatever it was I was asking of her. Again, still all of this was while she was loose, not touching her. It wasn't about me touching her. It wasn't about how soon I could get a halter on her, but it was about her willingness to try. Because the more she's willing to try, the more, when you present unfamiliar situations, there is less defensiveness, less fleeing, less reactivity, and I'm going to say a higher tolerance for the unknown. And then as she experiences the unknown and realizes that, she can work with that human and work with those, we're going to say, unfamiliar pressures, such as touching her all over, such as asking her to halter, and lead, and that sort of thing, then her confidence starts to build, that even though I may keep presenting new and unfamiliar scenarios, she can keep trying, and it doesn't cause her to become overwhelmed or defensive or check out or run away or do any of those sort of things. So everything was very specific and incremental, multiple sessions, really, really short sessions throughout the days, so that it was a very low intensity. And again, as I always say, the horse dictates to me how fast or slow we can go, depending on their mental and emotional state, which then influences how they physically respond to whatever it is I'm asking of them, whether they're loose or whether they're on the lead rope. So as we've progressed, this filly was brought in from the wild in Oregon. And, a big thing with young horses certainly is handling their feet. And I think too many people are fixated on, we have to hurry up and get the farrier here, rather than saying, how do we build the skills, and the communication, and create tools in the communication between the human and the horse to support the horse through this completely unfamiliar experience of the farrier. So way before we ever consider bringing a farrier into the picture, what is it that I need to be able to communicate, or how do I need to help this horse be able to think through things and respond in a reasonable way in order to have, I'm going to say, an uneventful experience, such as with the farrier. And so we worked a lot on that, whether it was just the basic considering giving to pressure, whether it was the basic consideration of her mentally preparing, as I would stand near a foot and just think about picking it up, and that she could offer to bend a knee or bend a hock, showing that she would be willing to give, and not always taking the foot, not creating a pattern of, we always go through the same 4 feet in the same order, asking her to step on different things to learn to balance on just 3 feet, getting her comfortable with ropes, dragging near her, on her, around her, and then eventually asking asking her to give with her legs to the pressure of the rope drawing her forward, or maybe carry the rope with it around her leg as I was leading and walking her. There were so many different scenarios that I did continuously as just part of our conversation. So it wasn't the fixation or the agenda. It would just be incorporated into our sessions so that it was non-eventful, so that it wasn't a big deal and she could try it out and move on to something else, and maybe we could come back and revisit it. And it was a very low pressure scenario, which allowed her to think through when I would create these awkward, unfamiliar, completely unnatural scenarios of imposing physical pressure on her. So the first time the farrier came out, I made sure that we were not in a rush. I made sure that he was of the mindset that, the whole point of this session, even though eventually, yes, we would like to trim her feet, was really about changing how she felt about this. So I need to preface this that originally her owners who adopted her had good intention and wanted to have the farrier come out, and someone who deemed themselves a Mustang trainer, we'll say, and a farrier, showed up to I guess trim this filly. But at that time, she really wasn't very halterable, and she wasn't. You couldn't lead her, you couldn't anything. So I'm not sure what the farrier was thinking, but anyways, it did not end well. There was double barrel kicking, there was flying over the top of people. So unfortunately, it led a very dramatic impression as far as the farrier. So when I had my farrier come out, my goal was just to get her brain okay with him. And so even when he first showed up and just stepped out of the truck, and again, I had had multiple people handling her, coming in and picking up her feet, that sort of thing. So as this farrier stepped out, put on his chaps, you could see the light bulb go off in her brain of that prior experience with a farrier, and she was on high alert. She was, snorting and big and dramatic in a way that honestly I hadn't even seen, even for all her concern of first showing up here. I hadn't seen that degree of concern. And most people would see that moment and go, okay, let me quit, let me stop, and let's just, do this something else or whatever. And yet it's an opportunity, because the horse is saying in her concerned and fearful behavior that she doesn't know how to handle this situation. And obviously, a previous situation left a pretty strong, um, we'll say, residual of people imposing themselves and her becoming quite defensive. So in the previously established tools and how I would communicate with her and being able to redirect her thought and helping her let go of any physical brace or locking up of her body, of being able to have pressure on, pressure off, as far as looking towards the bothersome thing, looking away from it, moving away from it when she would try, I helped her in a relatively short time, especially for the degree in which she was bothered, let go of that concern. And then the farrier came into the round pen, and as and we just moved around loose initially, where pressure on, pressure off as he walked towards her and away. And she went to leave, but then she started to become curious. And so all these previous things that I had been doing with her started to come back as tools so that she could handle the situation. And so eventually, I wound up asking her to be caught, and she came over to be caught. And then I helped her as far as us going towards the farrier, away from the farrier. Eventually, the farrier's touching her and then moving away. Eventually, the farrier's picking up her feet and giving them back and moving away. So all of this is pressure on, pressure off, but it's an opportunity to allow the horse to try it out, to try out the pressure of the unfamiliar, to try out something that maybe she's anticipating from past experience, but is now changing in the context of what she's experiencing, and the release of pressure, which unfortunately in new situations, rarely do people allow a horse a release of pressure, both mentally, physically, or spatially. So that release is really important to help keep diffusing any potential buildup in that horse. And eventually we did her front feet, and she stood nicely, and she was relaxed, and she was reasonable, and there was no pulling away. We did do very short increments. We did give her breaks of being able to walk away and sort herself out. And it was only until she could spatially move away from the farrier that she could breathe and process and blow her nose and then kind of regroup. And then we'd come back and do more. So I said, this was a lot. She ended up in a good place. This was, feeling good. So let's stop here. And a few weeks later, we'll work on her hind feet. So in the meantime, I continued on with handling more of her hind feet and ropes and all the things that I had mentioned earlier in the video. And so the farrier returns. And this time, when he gets out of his truck, she's again in a round pen. She's loose. And she goes to get Snorty. In about 15 seconds, she kind of starts just letting go of her anticipation. And she starts coming over to kind of see what he's doing. And he walks in with his tools and hoof stand and whatnot into the round pen. And she moves off about 10 feet, but then she stops and turns around and watches him intently. So it's a very different experience as far as where she went to anticipate, she went to flee in the old pattern, but she was able to stop herself without my direction. She was loose. And then I called her over to be caught, and we did a little bit of pressure on, pressure off. And relatively quickly, she let it go. She dropped her head, she relaxed her body. She was curious. She wasn't 100% sure that she needed, the farrier right next to her. But nothing, 1% of what we saw the first time. And so basically, in a very short time, we picked up their front feet and was able to do them, we'll say, in the normal way, where he's, holding her legs between his legs as he's trimming and whatnot, and lots of, breaks, but she was able to last for longer periods of time in the trimming before we would give her a break. And then went in for the hind foot. And again, each time before he would pick up a foot, I would help diffuse any tension in her neck, in her jaw, in her shoulders, in her front legs. I would help position her so that she was balanced, so that when she goes to stand on three legs, it could be as, we'll say, comfortable as possible. And she stood like a champ. Her head was dropped, and I scratched on her. There was a few moments or movements, we'll say, of a little bit of bounce and sure at the hind foot, and then relaxing it into him. And he made adjustments. This was a big one. He made adjustments as far as the height, as far as the position of where he held the foot, of when he gave the foot back. And so it was a compromise. It was a meeting in the middle so that it became uneventful. And again, walked away, gave her a break, scratched on her, and came back. And so we wound up doing all 4 feet, and it was a totally different experience. I mean, he kept saying, wow, I can't believe this is the same horse. But it was such a wonderful opportunity for this horse that's preparing her for the rest of life, for the future, for all the unknowns of who's going to handle her and how other farriers are going to be, to help teach her that when she tries, it's acknowledged, to help use the tools that were previously established so that I could support her through her concern and help her let go of it. So she had a very different experience than maybe what she initially anticipated. So the one thing that had been a little concerning for her was when the farrier had brought out the hoof stand initially. And, I had been practicing lifting her feet onto objects and practicing having her put her weight on them and me rasping them down and whatnot to kind of give an idea of that. So I said, well, hold on, because we're in a pretty good spot. She's still mentally here. We haven't overwhelmed her. And so I got the hoof stand and I brought it over and I just dropped the lead rope. So, she's not being held. She's just standing, and then drew her foot forward. And right away she gave and relaxed on the hoof stand. And, his comment was, wow, she really trusts you, but the point is, it wasn't about the trust. It was that all of these previously built up ways of communication had value to the horse. And so when I presented something new to her, such as using the hoof stand instead of the other objects I had been using, she was able to try with a reasonableness, with a thoughtfulness, and with a softness. So then I took her for a walk as a release, and she sorted out, and she chewed, and she licked, and she thought about it. And then I said, okay, now you come in, just kind of treat her normal, we'll say. So not creeping in super slow, just walking in normal. And he did, and he put the hoof stand down. And right away, she picked up her foot, and she put it on it. She kind of looked at him because, he's up underneath her. And then she relaxed. And, that feedback is where it tells you that you are helping the horse learn how to learn. You are helping the horse learn how to think through things rather than the instinctive fleeing and running away every time they're unsure and then stopping half a mile later to check in and see what was bothering them. I cannot tell you what a lifesaver these sort of skills are for horses. Teaching the horse to tie, teaching the horse to soften to pressure, teaching the horse to mentally stay engaged with the human. It changes everything about anything that we will ask of that horse in the future, whether it's with someone who's skilled or unskilled. Teaching that reasonableness in that horse can literally save their life nowadays, in who winds up with them, in how they handle unexpected or potentially emergency, situations. It's such a crucial foundation. And I find so many people are so busy with hurrying up and making and forcing and driving and pushing. If that first scenario, that when the farrier showed up, I had a mindset of, we have to do all 4 feet. We have to teach this horse a lesson. We have to make her comply. there is no way there would be softness. There is no way there would be thinking and thoughtfulness, and it could be a good learning opportunity for her or building her confidence in something that maybe initially seemed overwhelming. I cannot emphasize this enough. And this is why so often when I talk to people about slowing down, taking the time, helping support the horse, addressing their concerns, not trying to physically contain them, it's so that you get these outcomes. And yet, so much of the time, you don't get to see what happens. The good news is at the very end of the session, when her foot was on the hoof stand, I was able to pull out my phone quickly and take a little video clip, which now I'm going to add in here to show you her ending mental, emotional, and physical state with the session. So thanks for joining me. I'd love to hear your comments below. I'll see you next time.